By now, I'm sure you've heard, the 2023 NBA draft class is uber talented, and it has a little bit of everything. We've got potential MVPs, velvet-handed wings, and cutthroat competitors. The cake has to fully bake, but the early returns indicate that this could be an immensely special group. Among those selected, a fascinating trend bubbled up. 6 top 40 picks, 4 in the first round, and 3 of them with consecutive picks in the top 10 were spent on toolsy wing-sized players with decidedly dubious shooter etched at the top of their scouting reports, which, as we know, is an area of weakness where major developmental leaps are uncommon. Did I mistakenly take one of Elvis's sleeping pills? Isn't this the year 2023? We never did get the flying cars or jetpacks that we were promised, but we sure as hell have more players who could shoot the ball than ever before. Year after year, liabilities of that ilk get pinpointed and mercilessly exploited. So if we all agree that obvious weaknesses are bad, it does beg the equally obvious question.
Why would anyone do something like that?
Moves like this are either wagers made with educated confidence or misguided calamities anchored in faulty philosophy. So which one is it? It's amazing when you consider the spatial and positional revolutions that have happened over the past couple of decades in the NBA, how much the importance of something as small as a couple of footsteps has changed. In the fastest and most athletic league in the world, a couple of steps this way or that way can be the difference between living and dying. Those steps can also be the difference between a superstar having a feng shuied workspace and feeling like they're operating in a crowded elevator. This is the challenge of courting the non-big that also happens to be a non-shooter. Because they don't garner any closeout respect, and because they don't create the easy buckets that lob or post threats do, defenses yawn, resting assured that they can sag into gaps, tilting their entire scheme towards the players that can hurt them. So how on earth does a player like that avoid becoming a liability? If we look back over the past few seasons, and we'll arbitrarily choose to start in roughly 2017, the middle of the Warriors run, to try to best reflect where the game is now, there are some examples of players with shaky strokes that have survived and even thrived in some cases. These players are hard to find on championship level teams because the radical shift in the sport has weeded most of them out. For those who remain, it's a survival of the fittest, and I don't think that it's a coincidence that many of the survivors have some point guard DNA. That spans from smaller players like Gary Payton II and Marcus Smart on up to bigger forwards like Kyle Anderson. You could argue that the modern day patron saint for this type would be the recently retired Andre Iguodala. Andre's shooting was never quite as bad as some of the players we'll discuss here, but he was frequently dared to shoot in big games throughout his career. Even dating back to Arizona, Iguodala balanced that by being a nightmarishly disruptive defender. Long, sinewy, and lightning quick both laterally and when leaving the floor, while also ferociously attacking the rim and creating easy looks for everyone else. Lining up this range of examples side by side, some patterns emerge. The first is plus defender status. It's basically required that a non-shooter be a versatile and high-impact defender. They need to be a deterrent on the ball, they should have elevated awareness away from it, ideally they're not huntable on switches, and they need to not only react to the action, but anticipate it. The second is off-ball awareness. You can't just stand there, so these players should really know how and when to cut. This is piggybacking off of the previous one, but they also require the ability to put pressure on the rim in transition and whenever driving lanes are available. That might mean taking it off the rim and flying up the floor, looking for an easy one, or setting up orbiting shooters, or that might mean immediately attacking off the catch when the defense is rotating. Next is connective passing. They might not be the capitalized first letter at the beginning or the punctuation at the end of a sentence, but they must embrace the life of the comma, quick processing, and quick decisions. Lastly, nothing lightens the pressure on a struggling shooter quite like talented teammates in an appropriate scheme. We'll lump screening into this category also because it varies from system to system. My hunch has always been that offenses with less passing and with minimal movement are almost always going to make life harder for these types of players. It seems that the optimal move is to take long and athletic but spatially challenged players and mix them in with as much on and off ball action as possible. Shuffle them into the deck. Camouflage them. So, yes, what I just described is a Matt Murdock level of balance between major deficiency and intuition and skill within a person's environment. With that in mind, how are these rookies capable of living up to that standard? Let's start with Ausar Thompson, who's one of the more gifted athletes to enter the NBA in quite some time. There's a raw power in the way that Ausar rockets off the floor that you almost wouldn't believe if you looked at his pliable, rangy, Gumby-esque frame. He's on a path towards becoming one of the most emphatic and gloriously menacing recovery defenders in basketball. If he isn't already, he's capable of derailing an entire half-court set by himself. I'm confident that he will be a first-team all-defensive player within the next few years, if not sooner. His shooting, on the other hand, inspires a near polar opposite level of confidence. Small sample size warning here, but dating back to the 2009-10 season, among rookies who attempted at least 30 three-pointers, Ausar's 14.6% mark is the second lowest. And if you've been watching, that doesn't exactly feel dismissible as bad luck. Both of the Thompson brothers have tinkered exhaustively with their jumpers, and yet it still remains a glaring issue. It could be a rhythm thing, but something interesting about Ausar, again small sample, is that he's a rare example of someone who seems more comfy shooting off the dribble than off the catch. He's sitting on 43.3% of his dribble jumpers and a much lower 19% on his catch and shoots. The problem is that the vast majority of those shots have come on hard drives to his right, breaking and then spinning over his left shoulder and then fading. It's hard to say if some of his dribble to shoot comfort could translate over to catch and shoot. It's a tea leaf, but that's where we are. Ausar has given us plenty of glimpses of timely and heady cuts with thunderous endings, and creative extra passes when their offense does find some energy. The problem is that this rarely happens, and as a result, things are fantastically bleak in Detroit. Despite having some talent, Detroit has one of the worst roster builds in the league, and this severely penalizes someone like Ausar. I'm a longtime Cade believer, but he's not the type of dominant three-level scorer that can drag subpar pieces to overachievement. Among the players in the top 10 for total pick and roll reps, he's the least efficient, but I do think that there's a world where he's repositioned with more off-ball activity and as a movement shooter. It's just that his running mates complicate that. There's a concept in audio that's known as destructive interference that happens when two sound waves mirror each other inversely and as a result cancel one another. That's what I feel like Detroit has managed to do in trying to field combinations featuring Jaden Ivey, Killian Hayes, and Ausar. Separately, there are, to varying degrees, reasons to believe in each of them, but together... Another notable member of this strata is Anthony Black, the Energizer guard who the Orlando Magic took with the 6th pick in this draft. When describing AB's defensive strengths, you start with the obvious, his size. He's 6'7" with a 6'7.5" wingspan, which is tacked on a medium-ish frame, somewhere between spindly and beefy, that looks like it could add some strength. Although his overall defensive upside is probably lower because he's not the ultra-twitchy terror that Ausar Thompson is, Black still has terrific directional command of his physical tools. He's great about making sure that his feet do the work before his hands, mirroring ball handlers effortlessly, and then turning his shoulders perpendicular to the shooter so that he can contest with his closest hand. Personally, I love how active-minded and bought in he is on that end of the floor. Multiple efforts within one possession? Consider it done. AB is straight up annoying. He is the ferret in your bathtub. You read into raw emotion at your peril, but all of the evidence supports the idea that this kid is really invested and that he cares. For his size, Anthony is comfortable handling the ball and breaking down his man, but at that point it becomes a question of where he's trying to go. He's not a threat to shoot any kind of dribble pull-up, he frequently seems unsure of himself in the mid-range, and I'd like to see him attack the rim with a little more gusto. In summary, if it ain't a contested three or a layup, he ain't taking it. I'm cautiously optimistic about him someday spacing the floor, more so than Thompson. His elbow stays tucked in and his shooting arm is straight, but his shot almost has a casual reclining quality where it looks like he's leaning backward and slightly to his left. Shoddy as the results may seem, generally I'm not down on his shooting touch. Black's fit in Orlando isn't perfect, although he does have it better than Ausar in that he's riding next to some players who do pull gravity, which is creating opportunities for him. We've seen instances where he creeps behind turned heads and fixated eyes even if he doesn't get the ball. He's a bit of an erratic passer in terms of live dribble choices while having a good sense for ball reversals and timely kickouts, but the better that the Magic stars shoot it, the more we'll see his strengths pop. We only have time to dive on those two, but as I said in the intro, there are plenty more where that came from. Mann Thompson, who's been sidelined by an ankle injury for a lot of the season, faces extremely similar developmental issues in a drastically different environment. Andre Jackson was the 36th overall pick by the Bucks, and although he's a promising defender and a wonderful passer, he's been battling these demons on the biggest stages of college basketball. Bilal Coulibaly of the Wizards and Jaime Jaquez of the Heat might have fit into this category before the draft, but both of them have demonstrated enough shooting improvement to acquit themselves from the conversation, at least for now. When you consider the shooting talent that was taken in the later spots in this draft, there is a world where these teams live with some regret. But these are the risks that you take in trying to build a roster. Now we watch and we wait to see how these players grow and what their teams do to optimize their fits. There will inevitably be tests. Teams will quite literally force them to prove that they've improved. There's no skipping that part. No floating by unnoticed. And when it does, time and the grind will tell whether or not they can answer the call. Let me know if you agree.